My daughter-in-law snatched the fork right out of my hand at Sunday dinner and said I was eating too slow and holding everyone up. Margaret Chen, former Army medic and Purple Heart recipient, didn't raise her voice or argue back. Jessica, my son's wife of 3 years and supposed heir to our family ranch, just rolled her eyes and scraped my half-finished meal into the garbage disposal. By Tuesday morning, her name would be struck from every legal document, her inheritance dissolved, and her future on this land terminated forever. Wait, before we dive into how this all went down, I need to ask you something. Drop a comment below. And tell me, have you ever had a family member treat you like you were nothing more than an inconvenience? And make sure you hit that subscribe button because this story is about to get absolutely wild. The mashed potatoes were still steaming when I set them down next to the roast beef, the same Sunday dinner I'd been preparing for 43 years, in this kitchen. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air, mixing with the wood smoke drifting in from the fireplace my late husband Robert had built with his own hands back in 1981. I'd spent the entire morning preparing this meal, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because family dinners mattered to me, because breaking bread together was sacred in the Chen household, or at least it used to be. The dining room table was set with my grandmother's china, the delicate blue and white pattern that had survived 3 generations and 2 cross-country moves. Cloth napkins, properly folded. Crystal water glasses that caught the afternoon light streaming through the bay window overlooking our cattle pasture. The silverware was polished to a mirror shine, each piece placed with military precision, old habits from my army days that never quite left me. My son David arrived first, boots heavy on the front porch, the same measured step he'd inherited from me and his father before him. At 34, he still had that earnest smile that reminded me of the little boy who used to help me feed the horses before school. He hugged me tight, smelling like honest work and fresh air, his calloused, hands gentle on my shoulders. "Smells incredible in here, Mom," he said, voice warm with genuine appreciation. "You outdid yourself again." I squeezed his hand and felt that familiar swell of maternal pride. David had turned out exactly the way Robert and I had hoped. Hard-working, respectful, kind to his core. He ran the day-to-day operations of our 1,000-acre cattle ranch now, had been doing it for the past 5 years since my arthritis started slowing me down. The boy had a gift with livestock and an even better head for business. Under his management, we'd expanded our herd by 30% and secured 3 new contracts with regional distributors. The front door slammed shut with unnecessary force, rattling the family photos lining the hallway. Jessica's heels clicked against the hardwood floors like bullets, sharp and aggressive. She entered the dining room talking loudly into her phone, designer purse slung over one shoulder, not bothering to acknowledge me or the meal I'd spent hours preparing. "No, tell him the offer is insulting," she snapped into her device, manicured fingernails drumming impatiently against the doorframe. "If he wants the property, he needs to come correct with his pricing. I'm not running a charity here." She was talking about the Henderson place again, the small ranch adjacent to our property that had been in foreclosure for 8 months. Jessica had been circling it like a vulture, convinced she could flip it for a quick profit. The fact that the Henderson family had been our neighbors for 2 decades. That old Bill Henderson had helped us through 3 brutal winters when our equipment broke down, seemed to mean nothing to her. To Jessica, everything was a transaction, every relationship a potential revenue stream. David shot me an apologetic look and gently took his wife's elbow. "Jess, dinner's ready. Can you maybe finish that call later?" She held up one finger in his direction, not even glancing at him, and continued her conversation. "Listen, I don't care about their sob story. Business is business. Either they want to sell or they don't." I busied myself arranging the serving dishes, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. This had become our new normal, Jessica. Treating our family home like her personal office, our dinner table like her conference room. She'd moved in with David 18 months ago, ostensibly to help with wedding planning and to get a feel for ranch life. But increasingly, it felt like she was studying us, cataloging our assets, measuring everything for its potential value. The roast beef was perfectly medium rare, the way Robert used to like it, the way David still preferred it. I'd learned to cook it exactly right during my first year of marriage, when I was still adjusting to civilian life after my discharge from the Army. Back then, I'd approach cooking the same way I'd approached field medicine, with precision, attention to detail, and genuine care for the people depending on me. Jessica finally ended her call and dropped into her chair without a word of greeting, immediately reaching for her phone again. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people made in a week, paired with designer jeans that had never seen a day of actual work. Her highlighted hair was styled in loose beach waves, the kind of effortless look that actually required considerable time and money to achieve. "Sorry about that," David said, settling into his father's old chair at the head of the table. "Ranch business." "Henderson business," I corrected gently, passing him the mashed potatoes. "That's not our ranch business." Jessica looked up from her phone for the first time since arriving. "Actually, it could be our business if we play our cards right. That property would connect beautifully with the north pasture. We could probably increase our grazing capacity by 15%. The Hendersons are good people going through a rough patch," I replied, cutting into my roast beef with slow, deliberate movements. "Bill's been fighting cancer for 2 years. They're not livestock to be bought and sold. Sentiment doesn't pay." "The bills, Margaret," Jessica said, not bothering to look at me. "And neither does charity." The way she said my name, flat, dismissive, like she was addressing a subordinate, made my jaw tighten. I'd earned my stripes in the Army, served 2 tours overseas, saved lives under fire, and earned a Purple Heart when shrapnel from an IED nearly cost me my left leg. I'd come home and built this ranch from nothing with Robert, raised David to be a man of character, and weathered every storm life threw at us. I wasn't about to be lectured on business by someone whose greatest professional achievement was selling luxury condos to out-of-state investors. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Let's just enjoy dinner, okay? Mom went to a lot of trouble." "I'm just saying," Jessica continued, cutting her meat with sharp, efficient movements, "opportunities like this don't come around often. We need to think strategically about growth and expansion." I took a small bite of mashed potatoes, chewing slowly. At 72, I'd learned the value of taking my time with things that mattered. Food was meant to be savored, not wolfed down. Conversation was meant to flow naturally, not be rushed toward a predetermined conclusion. Life itself was meant to be lived with intention and grace, especially after you'd seen how quickly it could be taken away. Jessica finished her meal in record time, fork clicking against her plate like she was in a hurry to be anywhere else. She checked her watch, a sleek Rolex that David had given her for their engagement, and sighed dramatically. "I've got a conference call with a client in Los Angeles in 20 minutes, she announced, standing and smoothing down her cashmere sweater. "Can we wrap this up?" I was still working on my first helping, taking small bites and savoring the flavors I'd spent hours developing. The rosemary was perfectly balanced with the garlic, the beef tender enough to cut with a fork. Robert used to joke that I cooked like I was conducting a symphony, every element timed to perfection, every flavor note hitting exactly where it should. "Mom's still eating," David said quietly, gesturing toward my half-full plate. Jessica glanced at me with undisguised irritation. "She's eating too slow. We've been sitting here for 45 minutes already." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were harsh, I'd heard worse language from drill sergeants and trauma surgeons, but because they revealed something fundamental about how she saw me. I wasn't a person worthy of patience or respect. I was an obstacle to her schedule, an inconvenience to be managed and minimized. I set down my fork and looked at her directly. "I'm sorry if my pace doesn't suit your timeline, Jessica." "Look, I don't mean to be rude," she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. But some of us have actual work to do. I can't sit around all day waiting for you to finish chewing. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. David's face had gone pale, his hands gripping his napkin like he was trying to anchor himself. Through the bay window, I could see our cattle moving, slowly across the pasture, unhurried and peaceful. They understood something Jessica apparently didn't, that some things couldn't be rushed without losing their essential nature. Maybe I should pack this up, I said, reaching for my plate. Jessica was faster. She snatched my fork right out of my hand, actually took it from my fingers while I was mid-bite, and grabbed my plate before I could react. Here, let me help speed things along. She walked to the kitchen with my dinner, the plate still half full of food I'd prepared with care and had been enjoying at my own pace. I heard the garbage disposal roar to life, followed by the sound of my meal being scraped away like table scraps. When she returned, she was already reaching for her purse. There, problem solved. Now I can make my call. David stared at his wife, like he'd never seen her before. Jess, what the hell was that? What? I helped clean up. You're welcome. She kissed his cheek quickly, a perfunctory gesture that held no warmth. I'll be in the office if you need me. Try not to take forever with the dishes. The front door slammed again, rattling the photos in their frames. David and I sat in the sudden quiet, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock Robert had bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. My plate was gone, my fork was gone, but the taste of humiliation lingered bitter in my mouth. Mom, I'm so sorry, David began, his voice thick with embarrassment and something that might have been anger. I don't know what's gotten into her lately. I held up one hand, the same gesture I'd used to silence chattering soldiers during my years as a medic. My voice when I found it was steady and calm. It's not your fault, son. But inside something had shifted. Something fundamental and irreversible. I'd been disrespected in my own home, at my own table, while sharing food I'd prepared with love. The woman my son planned to marry, the woman who stood to inherit everything Robert and I had built, had just shown me exactly what she thought of me and my place in this family. I stood slowly, my arthritis making the movement careful and deliberate. I think I'll take a walk before dessert. Mom, please don't. I'm fine, David, really. I just need some air. I walked out through the kitchen door onto the back porch, where Robert's old rocking chair still sat facing the pasture. The afternoon sun was starting to slant toward evening, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Our cattle were settling in for the night, their low calls carrying on the breeze. I sat in Robert's chair and pulled out my phone. My fingers, steady from decades of medical training and ranch work, scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for: Patricia Hawkins, estate attorney. I'd met Patricia 2 years ago when I updated my will after Robert's passing. She was sharp, thorough, and had no patience for family drama or legal ambiguity. More importantly, she understood the difference between blood relations and chosen family, between legal heirs and deserving recipients. I typed a short message. Patricia, this is Margaret Chen. I need to schedule an appointment to discuss significant changes to my estate planning. How soon can we meet? The response came back within minutes. How about tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? My office, I typed back. Perfect, thank you. Then I deleted the entire text thread and slipped my phone back into my pocket. Through the kitchen window, I could see David clearing the dishes, his movements slow and dejected. In the distance, Jessica's voice carried from the home office, sharp and aggressive as she conducted her business call. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, and I continued rocking in Robert's chair. For the first time in months, I felt completely calm, clear, focused. Tomorrow morning, I would begin the process of rewriting our family's future. Tonight, I would sit with my husband's memory and remember what respect looked like, sounded like, felt like when it was real. The garbage disposal had made quick work of my dinner, but it would take much longer to clean up the mess Jessica had just made of her own life. The morning fog was just beginning to lift from the pasture when I drove my old Chevy pickup down the gravel road toward town. The truck was 23 years old, the same deep blue Robert had chosen when we bought it to haul feed and supplies. The leather seats were cracked from sun and use, the radio only picked up AM stations, and the air conditioning had given up the ghost 5 summers ago. But the engine still purred like a contented cat, and it knew every pothole and curve on the 30-mile drive to Patricia Hawkins's law office. I'd been awake since 4:30, the same time I'd risen every morning, for the past 50 years. Military habits die hard, and ranch life reinforces them daily. The cattle needed feeding, the horses needed checking, and the day's work began whether you felt ready or not. This morning, though, I'd moved through my routine with a different kind of purpose. Every action felt deliberate, weighted with significance. David had been in the kitchen when I came in from the morning chores, standing at the coffee maker in his work clothes, shoulders hunched with what looked like exhaustion. His hair was disheveled, his face drawn, and I suspected he hadn't slept much after yesterday's dinner disaster. "Morning, Mom," he'd said without turning around. "Coffee's almost ready." "Thank you, honey." I'd poured myself a travel mug and added, "Cream," the same routine we'd shared for years. "I'm heading into town this morning. Need anything from Miller's feed store?" "No, I'm good." He'd finally looked at me then, his eyes searching my face for signs of lingering hurt or anger. "About yesterday. I talked to Jessica last night. She knows she was out of line." I'd kept my expression neutral, the same mask I'd worn during tense situations in the Army when revealing too much emotion could get people killed. "What did she say?" David had run his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd picked up as a teenager. "She said she was stressed about work and didn't mean to be rude. She wants to apologize when she gets back from her meeting in Denver." Jessica had left before dawn for what she'd called a critical business opportunity in the city. Another real estate deal, another chance to make money off someone else's misfortune. The timing felt convenient. Disappear before any uncomfortable conversations could take place. Let David handle the cleanup while she pursued her next transaction. "I see," I'd said, which was neither acceptance nor forgiveness, just acknowledgement of information received. "She really is sorry, Mom. You know how she gets when she's focused on business. She doesn't always think about how things sound." I'd kissed his forehead the way I used to when he was small and worried about something beyond his control. "Don't concern yourself with it, sweetheart. These things have a way of working themselves out." Now, driving toward town with my appointment book on the passenger seat, I reflected on that conversation. David was a good man trying to make peace between the two most important women in his life. What he couldn't understand was that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed with simple apologies. Some disrespect ran too deep to be smoothed over with explanations about stress and business pressure. The law office of Hawkins and Associates sat on Main Street in a converted Victorian house, its pale yellow exterior and white gingerbread trim giving it the appearance of a fairy tale cottage rather than a place where serious legal business was conducted. But I knew from experience that Patricia Hawkins was as sharp as barbed wire and twice as effective at protecting what needed protecting. I parked in the small lot behind the building and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Gray hair, pulled back in a neat bun, minimal makeup, navy blue blouse pressed and clean. I looked like what I was, a 72-year-old ranch owner who'd served her country and built a life worth protecting. Professional, composed, ready for business. The reception area smelled like lavender and old books, with oriental rugs covering polished hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves lining every wall. Patricia's secretary, a efficient-looking woman, named Carol, greeted me with a warm smile and offered coffee, which I accepted gratefully. The drive had been longer than usual, my arthritis making it difficult to get comfortable behind the wheel. "Mrs. Chen, so good to see you again." Patricia said, emerging from her office with the same brisk energy I remembered. She was in her mid-50s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that spoke of success without showiness. "Please come in." Her office was a study in controlled elegance. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, law books arranged, with military precision. A large window overlooked the town square, where elderly men played chess at concrete tables and young mothers pushed strollers along tree-lined paths. It was a view that spoke of stability, community, the kind of enduring values that Jessica seemed to find irrelevant. Patricia settled behind her desk with a legal pad and her reading glasses. "Your message mentioned significant changes to your estate planning. What can I help you with?" I opened my purse and pulled out a manila folder containing copies of all my current legal documents: will, trust papers, power of attorney designations, beneficiary forms for insurance policies, and retirement accounts. I'd spent 2 hours the night before organizing everything, creating a complete picture of my financial life and its current distribution plan. "I need Jessica Morrison removed from all inheritance documents," I said without preamble. "Completely and permanently." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained professionally neutral. "Jessica is your son's fiancé, correct? Currently designated as a secondary beneficiary after David?" "That's right. She was added to the trust 18 months ago when they announced their engagement. At the time, it seemed like the natural thing to do, welcoming her into the family, showing good faith about their future together." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Circumstances have changed." "I see. And you want her removed entirely, not just moved to a different position in the succession?" "Entirely. I want it documented that she has no claim to any part of the Chen family estate, now or in the future. If something happens to David, if their marriage ends, if there are any challenges to the will after my death, I want it crystal clear that she gets nothing." Patricia made notes on her legal pad, her pen moving in quick, precise strokes. "Can you tell me what prompted this decision? The more specific you can be, the better I can craft language that will withstand any potential challenges." I had prepared for this question during the sleepless hours of the previous night. The story needed to be told clearly, factually, without emotional embellishment that might undermine its legal impact. I recounted the previous day's events in clinical detail: the disrespectful behavior during dinner, the snatching of my fork, the disposal of my meal, the dismissive comments about my eating pace. She took food out of my hands while I was eating. I concluded, in my own home, at my own table, food that I had prepared. Then she threw it away like garbage and told me she was helping speed things along. Patricia had stopped taking notes and was looking at me directly, her professional mask slipping enough to reveal genuine anger. "She physically took food away from you while you were eating?" "While the fork was literally in my mouth. In front of your son?" He was mortified, apologized profusely after she left, but the damage was done. Patricia set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Margaret, in 30 years of estate law, I've seen families torn apart by greed, addiction, abuse, and neglect. What you're describing isn't just rudeness. It's a fundamental lack of respect for your dignity as a human being. No one, and I mean no one, should take food from an elderly person's hands and throw it away." That's exactly how I saw it. This wasn't about dinner etiquette or time management. This was about power and control. And it's almost certainly a preview of how she'll treat you if she gains any legal authority over your assets or your care. Patricia picked up her pen again. "Tell me about her background. What does she do for work?" "Real estate speculation, primarily. She buys distressed properties, flips them quickly, targets people in financial trouble. She's currently circling our neighbor's ranch because they're facing foreclosure due to medical bills." So she has experience identifying and exploiting vulnerability. That's one way to put it. Patricia made more notes, her expression growing increasingly grim. What's your son's position on all this? Does he support removing her from the inheritance? David doesn't know I'm here. He's trying to make peace, asking me to understand that she was stressed about work. He loves her, and he's hoping this was an aberration that can be explained away. But you don't think it was an aberration. I think it was a moment of honesty. She showed me exactly what she thinks of me and my place in her vision of the family. I'm an inconvenience to be managed. Until I'm out of the way entirely. Patricia nodded slowly. I've seen this pattern before. The partner who seems charming and appropriate until they feel secure in their position, then gradually reveals controlling or abusive tendencies. Often it starts with testing boundaries, seeing how much disrespect the family will tolerate. And, if you tolerate a little, you'll be expected to tolerate a lot more, especially as you age and become more dependent on others for care and support. The weight of this observation settled over me like a cold blanket. Jessica wasn't just rude. She was dangerous. Someone who would snatch food from my hands at 72 would have no qualms about controlling my medical decisions, my living situation, my access to my own resources when I was 75 or 80. How quickly can we make these changes? I asked. I can have new documents drafted by the end of the week. We'll need to be very careful about the language, specific enough to prevent challenges, broad enough to cover any possible scenarios. I'll also recommend adding a clause about elder abuse that would automatically disqualify anyone who mistreats you physically, financially, or emotionally. That sounds perfect. Patricia opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder labeled Chen Family Trust, Current. She flipped through pages covered with legal text, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. Currently, Jessica is designated to receive 25% of the estate if David predeceases you, and she becomes co-trustee with him for the ranch operations if you become incapacitated. We'll need to restructure both of those provisions. My stomach clenched as I realized how much power I'd already given her. If something happened to me tomorrow, Jessica would have significant control over the ranch that Robert and I had built from nothing. She'd have authority over the land where his ashes were scattered, the cattle he'd loved, the legacy we'd intended to pass to David and his children. Who would you like to designate as your secondary beneficiary and co-trustee instead? I had thought about this during my sleepless night. My nephew Marcus in Colorado. He's a good man, understands ranch life, has no interest in exploiting the situation for personal gain, and he's young enough to provide oversight for decades if needed. I'll need his contact information and consent to include him in the trust. Documents. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Marcus's number. He was my late brother's son, 43 years old, married with 2 teenagers, operating his own successful ranch in the Colorado Rockies. We'd stayed close over the years, and he'd visited several times since Robert's death to check on me and help with major ranch maintenance projects. I should probably call him today to explain the situation. That would be wise. I'll also recommend designating a professional fiduciary as backup trustee, someone with no family connections who can provide completely objective oversight if needed. Patricia pulled out several legal forms and began explaining the process. Document revision would take 3 days, notarization and witness requirements would add another day, filing with the county would be completed by the end of the week. She would also prepare a letter to be sent to Jessica informing her of the changes, which was required by state law, but could be timed strategically. I'd recommend waiting until after the documents are fully executed and filed before sending. Notification, Patricia advised. That way there's no opportunity for interference or emotional manipulation during the legal process. How is she likely to react? Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. People who feel entitled to other people's money rarely react well to having that entitlement removed. But legally, there's nothing she can do. You have every right to distribute your assets as you see fit, and you're clearly competent to make these decisions. What if she tries to claim I was coerced or mentally incompetent? That's why we're documenting everything carefully. I'll include a detailed memo in your file explaining your reasoning, your mental clarity during our meetings, and the specific incidents that prompted these changes. If anyone ever challenges your capacity, we'll have a paper trail showing rational decision-making based on legitimate concerns. Patricia walked me through the next steps, reviewing and signing the new documents, arranging for proper witnesses, updating beneficiary information with banks and insurance companies. The process would take about 10 days from start to finish, during which I would need to maintain normal family interactions to avoid suspicion. "Can you do that?" she asked. "Continue having dinner with Jessica, being civil, not letting on that anything has changed?" I thought about the long months of covert operations during my Army service, the ability to remain calm under pressure while planning strategic responses to dangerous situations. I've had practice keeping important information to myself. Good. The element of surprise is crucial here. If she suspects what's coming, she might try to manipulate David into taking sides or create family drama designed to make you look unstable or vindictive. By the time I left Patricia's office, it was nearly noon. The sun had burned off the morning fog, revealing a crisp autumn day with the kind of blue sky that made everything seem possible. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, engine running, letting the magnitude of what I'd just set in motion settle into my bones. In 10 days, Jessica Morrison would discover that her future looked very different than she'd imagined. The ranch she'd been mentally cataloging and appraising would slip permanently beyond her reach. The inheritance she'd been counting on would evaporate. The woman she'd treated like an obstacle would prove to be an immovable force. I pulled out my phone and called. "Marcus." He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Aunt Maggie, this is a nice surprise. How are you holding up out there?" "I'm doing well, honey, but I need to talk to you about something important. Do you have a few minutes?" "For you? I've got all day. What's going on?" I told him about Jessica's behavior, about the changes I was making to the trust, about my need for a reliable family member to serve as backup executor and beneficiary. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of disgust or disbelief. "She took food out of your hands?" he said when I finished. "Aunt Maggie, that's not just rude, that's abusive. I'm glad you're protecting yourself legally. I wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable with the responsibility if anything happened to David." "Of course. Uncle Robert always said that family takes care of family, and that includes protecting family from people who would do them harm, even if those people are married to family." After we hung up, I drove to Miller's feed store to pick up supplements for the cattle and grain for the horses. The familiar routine of ranch business felt grounding after the intensity of the mornings. Legal discussions. Joe Miller, who'd sold us supplies for 20 years, asked about David and mentioned seeing Jessica around town in her fancy car, talking on her phone and looking important. "She seems like a go-getter," he said diplomatically. "She certainly is that," I agreed, which was true without being endorsing. The drive home gave me time to think about the conversation I'd eventually need to have with David. He would be hurt and confused when he learned about the changes to the trust. He might feel like I was punishing him for Jessica's behavior or trying to control his relationship choices. The timing would be crucial. Too soon, and Jessica might find out and create chaos. Too late, and David might feel betrayed by the secrecy. Patricia had recommended waiting until after the legal documents were filed, but before Jessica received official notification. That would give me a chance to explain my reasoning to David privately, to help him understand that this wasn't about his choices, but about protecting our family's legacy from someone who'd shown her true character. The ranch came into view as I crested the hill above our valley. 1,000 acres of prime grazing land. The house Robert and I had expanded and improved over decades, barns and outbuildings that represented years of hard work and careful investment. This land had sustained our family through droughts and economic downturns, through personal losses and unexpected challenges. It deserved to be in the hands of people who understood its value beyond mere dollar signs. David's truck was parked by the barn, which meant he was probably checking on the pregnant cows due to calve in the next few weeks. I could see him in the distance, moving slowly among the herd with the patience and attention that made him such a good rancher. Whatever conflicts existed in his personal life, his commitment to the land and the animals remained absolute. Jessica's car was still gone, which meant she was still in Denver pursuing whatever deal had taken her away so conveniently. Part of me wondered if she'd engineered the timing deliberately, create a crisis, then disappear before dealing with the consequences, leaving David to smooth things over and minimize the damage. If so, she'd miscalculated badly. I wasn't David's mother for nothing. I knew the difference between genuine remorse and tactical retreat. And I'd learned in the Army that the best response to aggression wasn't always immediate retaliation. Sometimes it was careful planning followed by decisive action when the enemy least expected it. I parked by the kitchen door and sat for a moment longer, watching David work with the cattle in the distance. In 10 days, he would inherit a ranch, unencumbered by anyone who saw it as a commodity rather than a legacy. Jessica Morrison had gambled that she could treat me with impunity because my age made me powerless. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla when I walked through the back door, the familiar scents wrapping around me like a welcoming embrace. I'd been baking since dawn. Apple turnovers, David's favorite since he was 8 years old. The recipe passed down from my mother, who'd learned it from her German grandmother in Kansas. The dough had to be rolled just right, thin but not fragile. And the apple filling needed the perfect balance of tart and sweet, with just a hint of nutmeg to complement the cinnamon. Baking had always been my meditation, my way of processing difficult emotions while creating something beautiful and nourishing. During my Army years, I'd smuggled ingredients into the mess hall to make birthday cakes for homesick soldiers, turning military rations into something that tasted like home. After particularly brutal shifts in the field hospital, I'd find myself kneading bread dough until my hands ached, working out the stress and trauma through repetitive motion and the alchemy of flour, water, and yeast. Today, 3 days after my meeting with Patricia Hawkins, I was baking to maintain normalcy. Jessica would return from Denver this afternoon, and we needed to resume our family routines as if nothing had changed. David couldn't suspect that I'd spent the morning reviewing revised trust documents, and Jessica couldn't sense that her legal ground was shifting beneath her designer shoes. The turnovers were cooling on wire racks when David came in from the barn, his boots clattering against the mudroom floor as he kicked them off. His face was flushed from the cold morning air, his work shirt stained with mud and hay. He looked like his father at that age, tall and lean, with capable hands and kind eyes that missed nothing important. "Something smells incredible in here," he said, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. "Please tell me those are what I think they are." Apple turnovers, fresh from the oven. I handed him one wrapped in a paper towel, watching his face light up with the same pure joy he'd shown as a child when I'd surprise him with his favorite treats. "How are the expectant mothers doing?" "Bessie's definitely going to drop her calf within the week, maybe sooner." He bit into the turnover and made a sound of pure contentment. "And Dolly's getting close, too. I moved them both to the pasture closest to the barn so we can keep an eye on them. Your father always said spring calving was the most hopeful time of year. New life, fresh starts, the promise that winter doesn't last forever." David nodded, chewing thoughtfully. He was right about that. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something." My heart rate accelerated slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. "What's on your mind?" Jessica called this morning from Denver. She wanted me to tell you again how sorry she is about Sunday dinner. She knows she was out of line. I turned back to the stove, ostensibly to check the coffee pot, but really to hide my face. Jessica's apology, delivered through David rather than directly to me, felt calculated and insufficient. A genuine apology would have come from her own mouth, accompanied by acknowledgement of specific wrongdoing and a commitment to change. That was thoughtful of her to call, I said carefully. She's been under a lot of pressure with this Denver deal. It's the biggest transaction she's ever handled, and if it goes through, it could set us up financially for years to come. The phrase, "set us up," caught my attention. Jessica had been in our family for less than 2 years, but she already spoke about our financial future as if it were hers to plan. David, generous and trusting as always, seemed to accept this assumption without question. "What kind of deal is it?" I asked, genuinely curious about what could justify such rudeness toward the woman who would ultimately decide Jessica's inheritance. "Some kind of commercial development project. She's being pretty secretive about the details, but she says it. Involves multiple investors and could be worth millions if everything falls into place." I poured coffee into 2 mugs, adding cream to mine and leaving his black the way he preferred it. Millions of dollars is serious money. No wonder she's feeling pressure. Exactly. That's why I'm hoping you can cut her some slack when she gets back. She's not usually like that, you know. She's actually been talking about wanting to contribute more to the ranch, maybe start a side business that could bring in additional income. This was news to me. In the 18 months Jessica had lived with us, she'd shown little interest in ranch operations beyond their potential resale value. She'd never helped with feeding, had never checked on sick animals, had never even learned the names of our horses. The idea that she was suddenly interested in contributing felt suspicious. What kind of side business? She mentioned something about agritourism, maybe converting one of the old barns into a venue for weddings and corporate retreats. She says there's a huge market for that kind of thing, especially with our location and the mountain views. I sipped my coffee and considered this information. Converting ranch property into event space would require significant investment, substantial changes to our insurance and zoning, and constant disruption of normal operations. It would also give Jessica a legitimate business reason to be involved in ranch finances and long-term planning. "That's quite an undertaking," I said neutrally. "Have you talked to our accountant about the financial implications?" "Not yet. Jessica wants to finish her research first, maybe bring in a consultant to do a feasibility study. But she's really excited about the possibilities." David's enthusiasm was genuine, but I could hear the subtle influence of Jessica's sales pitch in his words. She was positioning herself not just as his wife, but as a business partner with valuable ideas and connections. If her Denver deal succeeded, she'd have both financial credibility and increased leverage within our family dynamic. "I think it's wonderful that she's taking an interest in the ranch's future," I said, which was true in the abstract even if I questioned her motives. "Your father always said that land should be productive and purposeful." "She really wants to make a good impression on you, Mom. She knows how important your approval is to me." This statement revealed the heart of the issue. Jessica wasn't apologizing. Because she felt genuine remorse for her behavior. She was managing a relationship that threatened her financial interests. My approval mattered not because she respected me as a person, but because I controlled assets she wanted to access. "I appreciate that she wants us to get along," I said carefully. "Family harmony is important." David finished his turnover and reached for a second one. "She should be back by dinner time. Maybe we could do something nice to welcome her home? Show her that we're moving past Sunday's awkwardness?" "What did you have in mind?" "Maybe cook her favorite meal? She loves that salmon dish you make with the dill sauce. And we could open a bottle of that good wine she brought back from Napa last month." I nodded, even though the idea of celebrating Jessica's return with her favorite foods felt like rewarding bad behavior. But maintaining appearances was crucial for the next week, until Patricia's legal work was complete and filed with the county clerk. "That sounds lovely. I'll pick up fresh salmon when I go to town later." "Thanks, Mom. This really means a lot to me." David kissed my cheek and headed back outside to continue his morning chores. Through the kitchen window, I watched him walk toward the barn with the easy confidence of a man who belonged on this land, who understood its rhythms and responsibilities. He was everything Robert and I had hoped he'd become: hardworking, principled, connected to the earth in ways that went deeper than mere ownership. The tragedy was that Jessica would never appreciate these qualities in him. She saw David as her ticket to financial security and social status, not as a man whose greatest joy came from delivering a healthy calf, or whose proudest moments involved successful conservation of fragile grassland ecosystems. She would never understand that his real wealth lay in his connection to this place and its living systems. I spent the morning doing ordinary ranch wife tasks, balancing the checkbook, ordering supplies from the feed store, calling the veterinarian, to schedule spring vaccinations for the herd. But underneath these routine activities, I was acutely aware that I was living in a strange interlude between Jessica's offense and the consequences that would follow. Patricia had called yesterday to confirm that the revised trust documents were nearly complete. Jessica's name had been systematically removed from every section, replaced with Marcus's information and updated language about elder abuse disqualification. The new will specified that any beneficiary who physically or emotionally mistreated me would forfeit all inheritance rights immediately and permanently. The language is ironclad, Patricia had assured me. Even if she contests the changes, the documentation of her behavior toward you will support your decision to exclude her. The hardest part was not telling David about the changes. He deserves to know that his mother was protecting their family legacy from someone who'd shown her true colors. But premature disclosure could lead to arguments, emotional manipulation, or attempts to pressure me into reconsidering. Jessica was skilled at managing David's emotions, and I couldn't risk her talking him into advocating for her reinstatement. Around noon, I drove to town to buy groceries for dinner. The salmon looked beautiful at Morrison's Market, thick, pink, fillets with no smell of fishiness, exactly the quality Jessica expected and David deserved. I selected the best pieces, along with fresh dill, lemons, and a bottle of the expensive white wine she preferred. Standing in the checkout line, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the security monitor above the register. I looked like any other elderly ranch woman running errands. Sensible clothes, practical shoes, gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Nothing about my appearance suggested that I was currently orchestrating a legal maneuver that would reshape my family's future. "How's David doing out there?" asked Sally Morrison, the store owner's wife, as she rang up my purchases. "Haven't seen him in town lately." "He's been busy with calving season preparations. You know how it is this time of year." "And how's that? Pretty fiancé of his?" "Jessica, right? I saw her driving through town in that fancy car of hers the other day." "She's been traveling for business. Real estate work keeps her busy." Sally nodded knowingly. "Well, you tell David I said hello. And congratulations on the engagement. It's nice to see young people settling down and starting families." I smiled and thanked her, not bothering to mention that Jessica had shown no interest in starting a family or that her idea of settling down seemed to involve turning our ranch into a commercial venue. Some conversations were too complex for grocery store small talk. The drive home gave me time to think about the evening ahead. I would cook Jessica's favorite meal, serve her preferred wine, and make pleasant conversation about her Denver business trip. I would ask appropriate questions about her success, express interest in her agritourism ideas, and behave like the supportive future mother-in-law she expected me to be. But underneath this performance, I would be counting down the days until Patricia called to say the legal documents were filed and Jessica's notification letter was ready to be sent. 7 more days of pretending that Sunday's humiliation hadn't fundamentally changed our relationship. 7 more days of protecting David from the knowledge that his mother was taking decisive action to protect their family from his fiancé's influence. The ranch looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, cattle grazing contentedly in the near pasture, horses standing hip-deep in the creek that ran along the eastern boundary. This land had sustained our family for 3 generations, surviving droughts and economic downturns, personal tragedies and unexpected challenges. It deserved to be in the hands of people who understood its value beyond mere monetary worth. Parked by the kitchen door and carried my groceries inside, immediately beginning preparations for dinner. The salmon needed to marinate in lemon juice and herbs, the vegetables needed chopping, and the table needed setting with our good china and crystal. Everything had to be perfect, not because Jessica deserved such treatment, but because David needed to see that I was willing to make an effort for his sake. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was preparing to celebrate the homecoming of a woman whose inheritance I'd just eliminated, using family recipes and precious dishes to welcome someone who'd shown such disrespect for family traditions. But this dinner wasn't really about Jessica. It was about maintaining the facade that would protect my legal maneuvering from discovery. As I worked, I found myself thinking about Robert and what he would have done in this situation. He'd been a quiet man, slow to anger, but decisive when action was required. He would have hated Jessica's treatment of me, but he would have approached the solution methodically, without drama or emotional outbursts. "Handle it legal and proper," he would have said. "Don't give anyone ammunition to use against you later." The salmon was marinating, the vegetables were prepped, and the table was set with our wedding china when David came in from his afternoon work. He showered and changed into clean clothes, his face bright with anticipation for Jessica's return. His love for her was genuine and deep, which made the entire situation more complicated and painful. "She texted that she's about an hour out," he said, checking his phone. "The Denver meeting went really well. She's excited to tell us about it." "That's wonderful news. I'm looking forward to hearing about her success." David helped me open the wine and arrange flowers in a vase for the table. His movements were careful and deliberate, the same attention to detail he brought to ranch work, applied to creating a welcoming atmosphere for his fiancée. He was a good man trying to bridge the gap between two women he loved, unaware that one of them had already made reconciliation impossible. "Mom, I know this has been awkward since Sunday, but I really appreciate you making an effort. It means everything to me." I touched his cheek gently, the same gesture I'd used to comfort him as a child when he was worried about things beyond his control. "You're my son, David. Your happiness matters to me." Which was true, even though I believed his long-term happiness required protection from Jessica's influence. Sometimes love meant making difficult decisions that weren't immediately understood or appreciated. Sometimes it meant taking action that looked like betrayal, but was actually the deepest form of loyalty. The sound of expensive tires on gravel announced Jessica's arrival. Through the kitchen window, I could see her white BMW pulling up to the house, its pristine exterior reflecting the late afternoon sun. She stepped out in another designer outfit, this time a burgundy silk blouse and tailored black pants that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. David went to meet her at the door, and I could hear their voices in the hallway, his warm and welcoming, hers bright with artificial enthusiasm. She was performing the role of the apologetic fiancée, the successful businesswoman, the grateful future daughter-in-law. But I knew what lay beneath the performance now. "Margaret," she called as she entered the kitchen, arms extended as if for an embrace. "I'm so glad to be home." I allowed her to hug me briefly, noting the expensive perfume and the calculating assessment in her eyes as she looked around the kitchen, taking inventory of the dinner preparations and the effort I'd made on her behalf. "Welcome back," I said warmly. "David tells me your Denver meeting was successful. Beyond my wildest expectations. I can't wait to tell you both about it. But first, I owe you an apology for Sunday. I was completely out of line, and I'm truly sorry." The apology was smoothly delivered, rehearsed sounding, focused more on her own behavior than on the impact it had on me. She didn't mention taking food from my hands or throwing away my meal, details that would have been central to a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Thank you for saying that. I know you've been under pressure with your business. That's no excuse for bad manners. I was raised better than that." David beamed at this exchange, clearly relieved that we were moving past the awkwardness. He opened the wine, while Jessica regaled us with carefully edited stories about her Denver success. a major development deal that would bring her a substantial commission and establish her reputation in commercial real estate. "The best part is, this could be just the beginning," she said, accepting a glass of wine from David. "The investors I met with are interested in expanding into Colorado markets. They specifically mentioned interest in rural properties with development potential." I felt a chill run down my spine. Jessica's newfound interest in our ranch might not be about agritourism venues. It might be about positioning our property for sale to her commercial real estate contacts. The woman who'd snatched food from my hands might be planning to snatch our land as well. But I smiled and raised my glass in a toast. To new opportunities and bright futures. To family, David added, looking between Jessica and me with satisfaction. Jessica's eyes met mine over the rim of her wine glass, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw calculation there, assessment, the mind of someone who is cataloging assets and planning strategies. She thought she'd manage the situation successfully, apologized just enough to satisfy David, impressed us with her business success, and positioned herself for future influence over ranch decisions. She had no idea that her inheritance had already been eliminated, that her legal access to our family assets had been severed as cleanly as a surgeon's scalpel. She was celebrating a victory that had already been transformed into a defeat, counting wealth that would never be hers. 7 more days, I reminded myself as we sat down to dinner. 7 more days of this performance before Patricia's legal work was complete, and Jessica learned exactly how much her disrespect had cost her. The salmon was perfectly flaked, the dill, sauce rich and creamy, the wine crisp and expensive on my tongue. Jessica had been talking for 23 minutes straight about her Denver triumph, her words flowing like honey over broken glass, sweet on the surface but cutting underneath. She spoke of strategic partnerships and portfolio expansion, and leveraging rural assets for maximum return potential, each phrase carefully chosen to sound impressive while revealing nothing concrete. David hung on every word, his face bright with pride for his successful fiancée. He asked thoughtful questions about market conditions and investment timelines, genuinely interested in her business acumen. But I found myself listening with different ears, hearing the subtext beneath her polished presentation. Every mention of rural development opportunities felt like a threat to our ranch. Every reference to untapped market potential sounded like someone appraising our land for sale. The most exciting part, Jessica continued, cutting her salmon into precise, efficient bites, is that my new contacts are specifically looking for properties like this one. Large acreage, mountain views, proximity to Denver but far enough out to feel remote. They see huge potential in the agritourism market. "That's exactly what we were talking about this morning," David said, glancing at me with enthusiasm. "The wedding venue idea, the corporate retreats. It could be a perfect fit." Jessica's smile was sharp as winter sunlight. "Actually, I'm thinking bigger than that now. These investors have experience with luxury resort development, high-end cabins, spa facilities, guided outdoor experiences. The kind of operation that could generate serious revenue streams." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Resort development meant transforming our working ranch into a commercial entertainment complex. It meant bulldozers and construction crews, parking lots where cattle now grazed, strangers trampling the meadows where Robert's ashes were scattered. It meant the complete destruction of everything we'd built and preserved for 43 years. "That sounds like it would require significant changes to the property," I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Well, yes. Obviously there would be some modifications needed, but the potential return on investment would be enormous. We're talking about creating a destination resort that could be worth tens of millions within 5 years." David set down his wine glass, his expression suddenly thoughtful. "Mom, what do you think about something like that? It would certainly solve any financial concerns about the ranch's future." I looked across the table at my son, seeing Robert's earnest face and trusting nature, and felt my heart break a little. David genuinely believed that Jessica's interest in our property was motivated by concern for our family's financial security. He couldn't see what I saw, a predator circling her prey, using the language of partnership and mutual benefit to mask a plan that would benefit only herself. "It's certainly an interesting idea," I said diplomatically, "though I imagine it would take years of planning and substantial upfront investment." "That's where my Denver contacts come in," Jessica said, her voice taking on the polished tone of a practiced saleswoman. "They have access to the kind of capital that could fund the entire development without requiring any personal financial risk from us. We would essentially be partners in the venture, contributing the land while they provide the expertise and investment." The phrase, "contributing the land," sent ice through my veins. She was talking about signing over our ranch to outside developers, trading our family legacy for a partnership in a commercial venture controlled by strangers. If such a deal went forward, we would own nothing but a percentage of a business that could be sold, dissolved, or restructured at any time. "Have you had a chance to research these investors?" I asked. "Their track record with similar projects?" Jessica's smile flickered for just a moment. "I'm still in the preliminary stages of due diligence, obviously. But their reputation in the Denver market is impeccable. They've done resort developments in Aspen, Vail, several properties in Montana." I nodded, as if this information was reassuring rather than terrifying. Developers who specialized in luxury resort properties in exclusive mountain communities weren't interested in preserving working ranches or respecting family traditions. They were interested in maximizing profit per acre, creating experiences that would attract wealthy tourists, transforming authentic rural landscapes into manufactured wilderness playgrounds. "It's definitely worth exploring," David said, reaching for Jessica's hand across the table. "Even if we decided not to move forward, it would be good to understand all our options." Jessica squeezed his fingers, her engagement ring catching the candlelight. The diamond was substantial, 2 carats, flawless clarity, set in platinum. David had saved for months to afford it, working extra shifts at neighboring ranches to supplement our income. At the time, I'd been touched by his devotion and sacrifice. Now I wondered if Jessica had specifically chosen such an expensive ring, knowing it would demonstrate David's willingness to spend beyond his means to make her happy. "I love that you're so supportive of my career," she said to him, her voice soft with manufactured affection. Not every man would be comfortable with his wife having such ambitious business goals. "I want you to be successful and fulfilled," David replied earnestly. "If that means thinking big and taking some risks, I'm behind you 100%. I continued eating my salmon, chewing slowly and deliberately while my mind raced through the implications of what I was hearing. Jessica wasn't just planning to inherit our ranch. She was planning to transform it into something completely different, something that would generate the kind of wealth that matched her expensive tastes and ambitious lifestyle. The woman who'd GBE'd you, snatched food from my hands, was now planning to snatch our entire way of life. Of course, any major decisions about the property would need everyone's input and agreement, Jessica added, glancing at me with what looked like deference but felt like calculation. "I wouldn't want to move forward with anything unless we were all completely comfortable with the direction." This statement was particularly galling because it assumed she had standing to make decisions about our property at all. She spoke as if she were already a full partner in ranch ownership, as if her voice carried equal weight with mine and David's in determining our land's future. The casual presumption revealed just how thoroughly she'd convinced herself that marriage to David gave her automatic rights to everything we owned. "I appreciate that," I said, refilling my wine glass with steady hands. "Major property decisions should definitely be family decisions." "Exactly. We're going to be family soon, and I want us to function as a real team, equal partners in everything." David beamed at this declaration, clearly moved by Jessica's apparent desire for inclusion and collaboration. He couldn't hear what I heard. The word equal doing heavy lifting in a sentence that was really about control and ownership. Jessica wasn't interested in being an equal partner. She was interested in being the managing partner, using the language of equality to gain access to decision-making authority. The conversation shifted to wedding planning, venue options, guest lists, catering decisions that Jessica had strong opinions about despite claiming to value everyone's input. She wanted the ceremony at an exclusive mountain resort, the reception catered by a Denver company that specialized in high-end events, flowers flown in from California, photographers, whose work appeared in luxury wedding magazines. "I know it sounds extravagant," she said, noting David's slightly overwhelmed expression as the costs mounted. "But weddings are once-in-a-lifetime events. We should do it right." "Whatever makes you happy," David said, though I could see him, mentally calculating expenses that would require taking on debt or dipping into ranch operating funds. "Actually, I've been thinking about that," Jessica continued, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with purpose. "If we move forward with the resort development discussions, we might be able to coordinate the timing. Imagine having our wedding at the property right before the development begins, like a celebration of the past and the future coming together." I set down my fork and looked at her directly. "That's assuming we decide to pursue development at all." "Of course," she said quickly. "I'm just thinking out loud about possibilities. But wouldn't it be romantic? Getting married on the land where we plan to build our future together?" The phrase "build our future" was doing its own heavy lifting. Jessica wasn't talking about building a future with David on our family ranch. She was talking about building a commercial development that would erase our family ranch entirely. She was romanticizing the destruction of everything Robert and I had created, packaging it as a love story about new beginnings and shared dreams. David, caught up in her vision, nodded enthusiastically. "That does sound pretty incredible. A wedding. That kicks off a whole new chapter for the ranch." "Exactly. And with the right planning, we could document the entire process. The wedding, the development, the transformation. It could be an amazing story of how traditional agriculture evolves to meet modern opportunities." I excused myself to clear the dinner plates, needing a moment to compose myself in the kitchen. Jessica's casual mention of documenting the transformation suggested she'd already envisioned herself as the protagonist in a story about modernizing rural America. She would be the visionary businesswoman who brought sophisticated development to a traditional ranch, the city professional who showed country people how to maximize their assets. The reality was that she would be the person who destroyed a functioning ranch operation to create a playground for wealthy tourists, the woman who traded authentic agricultural heritage for manufactured wilderness experiences. She would profit from erasing the very authenticity that made our land valuable to developers in the first place. When I returned to the dining room with coffee and the apple turnovers I'd baked that morning, Jessica and David were looking at something on her phone, presumably photographs or promotional materials from her Denver meetings. Their heads were bent together in intimate consultation, and for a moment, they looked like any young couple planning their future together. "These are the Montana properties I mentioned," Jessica was saying, swiping through images of luxury cabins and manicured landscapes. "Look at the attention to detail, the way they've preserved the natural beauty while adding all the amenities guests expect." The photographs showed what Jessica considered preserved natural beauty. Carefully groomed meadows surrounding architect-designed buildings that looked rustic from a distance, but featured floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furnishings, and hot tubs positioned for optimal mountain views. It was nature as interior decoration, wilderness as backdrop for luxury consumption. "They're beautiful," David said admiringly. "Really high-quality construction and design." "The average nightly rate is $1,200 per cabin," Jessica added. "During peak season, they're booked solid 6 months in advance. The return on investment is incredible." I served coffee and turnovers while listening to Jessica paint, a picture of financial success that made resort development sound like a guaranteed path to wealth and security. She had statistics about occupancy rates and revenue projections, Comparisons to similar properties in Colorado and Wyoming, testimonials from investors who'd seen enormous returns on their development partnerships. What she didn't mention was the failure rate for resort developments in rural areas, the environmental impact of increased traffic and construction, the way such projects often became financial burdens when tourism patterns shifted or economic downturns reduced luxury travel spending. She presented only the most optimistic scenarios, the best-case outcomes that supported her agenda. "Have you given any thought to the impact on your current ranch operations?" I asked. "Cattle and resort guests don't always mix well." Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "The beauty of partnering with experienced developers is that they handle all those logistical challenges. The cattle operation could be relocated to a smaller portion of the property, or transitioned out entirely if the resort development proves more profitable." Transitioned out entirely was a euphemism for ending the ranch operation that had sustained our family for 3 generations. Jessica was casually suggesting that we abandon the work Robert and I had devoted our lives to, treating our cattle operation like a hobby that could be discarded when something more lucrative came along. David looked uncomfortable for the first time that evening. "I don't know about getting rid of the cattle entirely. Ranching is kind of who we are, you know?" "I understand the emotional attachment," Jessica said, her tone gentle but patronizing. "But sometimes we have to be willing to evolve beyond what we've always done to embrace better opportunities. Your great-grandfather probably never imagined you'd be running cattle instead of farming, right? This would just be the next evolution." The comparison was offensive and historically inaccurate. David's great-grandfather had transitioned from farming to ranching because the land was better suited to grazing than crop production, and because cattle could thrive in our mountain climate and terrain. It was an adaptation that worked with the natural characteristics of our property, not against them. Resort development would work against everything that made our land valuable as a ranch. The isolation that cattle needed for healthy grazing, the seasonal rhythms that governed calving and breeding, the water rights that supported our irrigation systems. Jessica was proposing to sacrifice all of these functional advantages for the sake of creating artificial amenities for tourists. "It's definitely something to think about," David said diplomatically, clearly torn between his fiancée's enthusiasm and his own deep connection to ranch life. "Of course," Jessica agreed. "I'm not suggesting we rush into anything, but opportunities like this don't come along often, and it would be a shame to miss out because we were too attached to old ways of doing things." The phrase "old ways of doing things" revealed Jessica's fundamental misunderstanding of what we did here. Ranching wasn't an old way of doing things. It was a sustainable way of managing land that would continue producing food and supporting families long after luxury resorts had gone out of fashion. Our cattle operation would still be valuable when tourism trends shifted, when economic downturns reduced discretionary spending, when environmental concerns made high-impact developments less popular. But Jessica saw only immediate financial potential, not long-term sustainability. She was thinking like a real estate speculator, not like someone planning to spend decades on this land, which made sense, because she probably wasn't planning to spend decades here at all. She was planning to cash out as quickly and profitably as possible. I sipped my coffee and watched her continue her sales pitch, noting how skillfully she managed David's emotions. When he expressed concern about preserving ranch traditions, she acknowledged his feelings while redirecting toward financial benefits. When he worried about the environmental impact, she mentioned the developer's commitment to sustainable luxury and eco-friendly design. She had an answer for every objection, a reassurance for every concern. What she didn't have was genuine respect for the life David had chosen, or the legacy his parents had built. She saw our ranch as raw material for her ambitions, our family traditions as obstacles to her advancement. The woman who'd taken food from my hands was now proposing to take our entire way of life, packaging the theft as a gift she was offering us. 5 more days, I reminded myself, as Jessica launched into another story about her Denver investors' success with similar properties. 5 more days until Patricia's legal work was complete, and Jessica discovered that her access to our family assets had been permanently severed. 5 more days of listening to her plan our destruction while pretending to value our input. By the time we finished coffee and cleared the table, it was nearly 10 o'clock. Jessica excused herself to make some business calls, leaving David and me alone in the kitchen as we loaded the dishwasher and put away the good china. "She's really excited about these possibilities," David said, his voice carefully neutral. "What do you think about the resort development idea?" I chose my words carefully, wanting to plant seeds of caution without revealing the depth of my opposition. It's a big decision that would change everything about how we live and work here. I think we'd need to do extensive research before considering anything that dramatic. That makes sense. I love the ranch the way it is, but I also want us to be financially secure. And if Jessica's contacts could guarantee that kind of return on investment? Guarantees in business are rare, sweetheart, especially in tourism and hospitality. Those industries can be very volatile. David nodded thoughtfully. I guess I should probably talk to our accountant about it. Maybe get some independent advice about the financial projections. That would be wise, and you might want to consult with a lawyer too, someone who specializes in development partnerships. The contracts for that kind of venture can be very complex. Good thinking. I don't want to make any mistakes with something this important. I kissed his forehead and headed toward my bedroom, leaving him to finish the kitchen cleanup. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear Jessica's voice from the home office, animated and confident as she discussed property acquisition opportunities and development timelines with someone on the phone. In 5 days, her timeline would become completely irrelevant. The property she was so eager to develop would be legally protected from her influence forever. The woman who saw our ranch as her path to wealth would discover that she'd forfeited any claim to that wealth the moment she decided to treat me with contempt. But tonight, she was still planning her future as if it were guaranteed, still counting assets that would never be hers, still believing that marriage to David gave her the right to determine our family's destiny. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been about everything. The morning air carried the scent of rain and new grass when I walked out to check on Bessie, our Angus cow who'd been showing signs of labor since yesterday evening. Dawn was still an hour away, but I'd learned over decades of ranch life that cattle rarely consult human schedules when deciding to bring new life into the world. The barn was quiet, except for the soft sounds of animals settling into their morning routines, and the electric lantern cast long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. Bessie was lying on her side in the calving pen, her breathing heavy and labored, eyes wide with the ancient focus of a mother preparing to deliver her young. I'd assisted with hundreds of births over the years, and experience had taught me to read the subtle signs that indicated whether intervention would be needed or if nature should be allowed to take its course. Everything looked normal so far. No signs of distress that would require calling the veterinarian. "Easy, girl," I murmured, running my hand along her flank. "You're doing fine. Take your time." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was encouraging a cow to take her time, while Jessica had criticized me for the same approach to eating dinner. But this was different. This was about respecting natural processes, understanding that some things couldn't be rushed without causing harm. Bessie would deliver her calf when her body was ready, and my job was to be present, prepared, and patient. David appeared in the barn doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour, carrying a thermos of coffee and a worried expression. "How's she looking?" "Good. Strong contractions, normal positioning as far as I can tell. Should be straightforward, but it might take a while yet." He poured coffee into 2 paper cups and handed me one, the steam rising in the cool morning air. We stood together, in comfortable silence, watching Bessie work through her labor with the stoic determination that had made our Angus herd so successful over the years. These animals were tough, self-sufficient, Excellent mothers who rarely needed human assistance during calving. "I've been thinking about what Jessica said last night," David said quietly, not wanting to disturb Bessie with loud conversation. "About the resort development." My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice neutral. "What about it?" "I know she's excited about the financial possibilities, but I can't imagine this place without cattle. Every morning when I walk out here, when I see the herd spread across the pasture, I feel connected to something bigger than myself. Dad always said ranching wasn't just a job, it was a calling." Relief washed through me like cool water. David's connection to this land ran deeper than Jessica's sales pitch, deeper than financial projections or development partnerships. He understood what she couldn't, that some things were more valuable than money, that some legacies couldn't be converted into investment opportunities without losing their essential meaning. "Your father was right about that. This land has sustained our family for 3 generations because we've worked with its natural character, not against it." That's exactly what I was thinking. These mountains, these meadows, the way the creek runs through the eastern pasture, it all fits together perfectly for grazing. Why would we want to tear that up to build cabins for tourists who'll be here for a few days and then leave? David's question revealed the fundamental difference between his perspective and Jessica's. He saw our ranch as a living system, interconnected and balanced, where every element served a purpose in maintaining the whole. Jessica saw it as a collection of assets that could be rearranged, developed, or liquidated to maximize financial return. "Have you talked to Jessica about your concerns?" "Not directly. I don't want her to think I'm not supportive of her career or her ideas. She's worked really hard to build relationships with these investors, and I know how much this opportunity means to her." I sipped my coffee and considered how to respond. David was trying to balance loyalty to his fiancée with his own deep convictions about ranch life, and Jessica was skilled at making him feel guilty for prioritizing anything over her ambitions. She'd positioned her resort development scheme as a test of his support for her success, making it difficult for him to voice opposition without seeming unsupportive or controlling. Supporting someone doesn't mean agreeing with everything they propose, I said carefully. You can love Jessica and still have legitimate concerns about major changes to the ranch. I know that intellectually, but she gets so passionate about her projects, and she's convinced this could set us up financially for life. Maybe I'm being too sentimental about keeping things the way they are. Bessie shifted position and let out a low moan, signaling that her labor was progressing. David and I moved closer to the pen, ready to assist if complications arose. The miracle of birth never lost its power to humble me, the way life found a way to continue itself, generation after generation, despite all the obstacles and uncertainties that surrounded it. Sentiment isn't always a weakness, I said, watching. Bessie worked through another contraction. Sometimes it's wisdom. The things we feel sentimental about are usually the things that matter most to who we are. Dad used to say that the land would tell you what it wanted to be if you listened carefully enough. And what is this land telling you? David looked out across the pasture where our cattle were beginning to stir in the early morning light, dark, shapes moving slowly through the mist that rose from the creek. That it wants to stay a ranch. That it's happiest when it's doing what it was designed to do. We stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to Bessie's breathing and the soft sounds of the barn waking up around us. I wanted to tell David about the changes I'd made to the trust, about the legal protections I'd put in place to ensure that our ranch would remain a ranch regardless of Jessica's development schemes. But the timing wasn't right. Patricia's work wasn't complete, and premature disclosure could create complications that might undermine the entire strategy. Whatever decisions we make about the property should be unanimous, I said instead. This ranch belongs to our family, and family decisions should involve everyone who has a real stake in the outcome. Jessica would say she has a real stake. She's going to be my wife, part of the family. Marriage is certainly important. But there's a difference between being part of a family and understanding what that family values most deeply. David nodded slowly, processing this distinction. You're saying Jessica doesn't really understand what this place means to us. I'm saying she sees it differently than we do. That's not necessarily wrong, but it is something to consider when making permanent decisions about its future. Bessie's breathing changed, becoming more focused and intense. David and I moved closer, recognizing the signs that indicated active labor was beginning. Within the next hour, we would either welcome a healthy calf or face the complications that sometimes made cattle births challenging and dangerous. Here we go, David murmured, checking his watch. Right on schedule. The next 45 minutes required our complete attention as Bessie worked through the final stages of delivery. Her calf was positioned correctly, and the birth proceeded. Without complications, but we remained alert and ready to intervene if problems developed. This was the part of ranching that Jessica would never understand. The patient vigilance required to support natural processes without interfering unnecessarily. When the calf finally emerged, wet and steaming in the cool morning air, both David and I smiled with the satisfaction that came from witnessing new life entering the world. The baby was strong and healthy, already trying to lift its head and locate its mother. Bessie immediately began the ancient ritual of cleaning and bonding with her offspring, her maternal instincts taking over completely. Beautiful heifer, David said with pride. She's going to be a good addition to the breeding program. I watched the new mother and daughter together, struck by the continuity they represented. This calf would grow up on our ranch, eventually produce calves of her own, contribute to the genetic strength of our herd for years to come. She was part of a legacy that stretched back generations and would continue into the future, assuming our land remained dedicated to its highest and best use. This is what Jessica's investors would destroy, I said quietly. Not just the buildings or the fencing, but the relationships. The breeding programs, the genetic lines, the knowledge that's been accumulated over decades. David nodded, his expression serious. I hadn't thought about it that way. All the years of careful selection, building up the quality of the herd, that would all be lost if we converted to resort development. It would take decades to rebuild what we've created here. And there's no guarantee that whoever bought the property after us would have any interest in continuing the agricultural heritage. Jessica keeps talking about this being an evolution, like going from farming to ranching, but that comparison doesn't really work, does it? Your great-grandfather changed crops, not livelihoods. He was still feeding people, still working the land, still building something sustainable for future generations. Resort development isn't evolution. It's abandonment of everything agriculture represents. We spent another 30 minutes monitoring Bessie and her calf, ensuring that nursing was established and that both mother and baby were healthy and comfortable. The sun had risen fully by the time we left the barn, painting the eastern mountains in shades of gold and pink that no resort development could improve upon. Walking back to the house, I found myself thinking about timing and consequences. Jessica's resort development scheme was gaining momentum in David's mind despite his reservations, and her Denver investors were apparently pressing for decisions about moving forward with property assessments and partnership agreements. If I waited much longer to reveal the trust changes, David might make commitments or agreements that would be difficult to undo. But Patricia had been clear about the importance of completing the legal process before disclosure. Premature revelation could lead to challenges or interference that might undermine the entire strategy. Jessica was smart and ruthless, with connections to lawyers and investors who might help her find ways to contest or delay the trust modifications, if she learned about them too soon. The house was quiet when we entered through the kitchen door, the coffee pot still warm from our early morning preparations. Jessica's car was in the driveway, but there were no sounds from upstairs, indicating she was still asleep despite the day being well underway. City people, I reflected. often failed to understand that ranch work began with sunrise regardless of personal preference or comfort. "I should call the vet to schedule the spring vaccinations," David said, pouring fresh coffee. "With calving season starting, we need to make sure everyone stays healthy." "Good thinking. And we should probably order extra mineral supplements for the nursing mothers." We spent the next hour on routine ranch business, scheduling veterinary visits, ordering supplies, reviewing breeding records for the cows due to calve in the coming weeks. It was the kind of detailed, unglamorous work that kept a ranch operation running smoothly, the careful attention to animal health and nutrition that ensured our cattle remained productive and profitable year after year. Jessica appeared in the kitchen around 9 o'clock, perfectly groomed despite having just awakened, wearing silk pajamas and a matching robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. She moved with the casual entitlement of someone accustomed to sleeping late and expecting others to accommodate her schedule. "Good morning," she said, kissing David's cheek and nodding in my direction. "How did everyone sleep?" "We've been up since 5, David replied. "Bessie had her calf this morning. A beautiful heifer." "That's nice," Jessica said without particular interest, opening the refrigerator to examine breakfast options. "I have a conference call with the Denver investors at 10. They want to discuss timeline options for the property assessment." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. Property assessment? Just preliminary evaluation work, market analysis, development feasibility, that sort of thing. Nothing that commits us to anything, but information we'd need to make informed decisions. The casual way Jessica mentioned property assessment revealed how far her planning had progressed without our knowledge or consent. She was already in active discussions with investors about our ranch, already moving forward with processes that would establish its development value, already treating our family property like her personal business opportunity. "Who would be doing this assessment?" I asked. "A team from Denver that specializes in rural development projects. They've worked on several of the Montana properties I showed you pictures of. Very professional, very discreet. I'd want to review their credentials and references before allowing anyone onto the property for evaluation purposes," I said firmly. Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. We'd want to be thorough about vetting anyone who comes onto the ranch. But these are serious investors with established track records. They're not going to work with amateur assessment teams. I'm sure they're competent, but this is our home, and we need to be comfortable with anyone who's walking around taking pictures and making notes about development potential." "Margaret's right," David said, though his tone was diplomatic rather than confrontational. "We should know exactly who these people are and what kind of information they'll be gathering." Jessica poured herself coffee with movements that were perhaps a shade too sharp, too controlled. "I can certainly arrange for you to speak with them directly, though I should mention that this opportunity is somewhat time-sensitive. The investment group has several properties under consideration, and they're moving forward with the ones where ownership is most cooperative and decisive." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jessica was suggesting that our caution about property assessment could cost us the development opportunity entirely, that her investors might move on to more accommodating landowners if we insisted on thorough vetting and careful consideration. She was using artificial urgency to pressure us into making quick decisions that would serve her interests rather than ours. "If it's the right opportunity, it will wait for us to make thoughtful decisions," I replied evenly. "And if it won't wait, then it probably isn't as good an opportunity as it appears to be." Jessica's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or frustration, quickly suppressed behind her practiced smile. "I understand being cautious, but sometimes caution can become an excuse for missing out on life-changing opportunities. And sometimes urgency can be a warning sign that someone is trying to pressure you into decisions you'll regret later," I countered. David looked between us with growing discomfort, recognizing the tension beneath our polite words, but not understanding its source. He couldn't see what I saw, that Jessica was using increasingly aggressive tactics to advance her development scheme, that her patience with our family's decision-making process was wearing thin, that she was beginning to reveal the controlling personality that had led her to snatch food from my hands. "Maybe we could compromise," David suggested. "Let them do the preliminary assessment, but make it clear that we're not committing to anything until we've had time to review all the information and implications." "That sounds reasonable," Jessica agreed quickly, sensing an opening. "The assessment would give us concrete data to work with instead of just speculation about possibilities." I nodded as if considering this compromise, though internally I was calculating how much information Jessica's assessors could gather before Patricia's legal work was complete. Property assessment typically involved extensive photography, detailed measurements, soil and water testing, analysis of access routes and infrastructure capacity, all information that would be valuable to Jessica's investors regardless of whether we ultimately agreed to development. "I'd want to be present during any assessment activities," I said, "to make sure our current operations aren't disrupted and our privacy is respected." "Absolutely," Jessica said, though something in her expression suggested she found my insistence on oversight irritating rather than reasonable. "I'll make sure the assessment team understands their guests on a working ranch." The conversation was interrupted by Jessica's phone ringing with the conference call she'd mentioned. She excused herself to take the call in the home office, leaving David and me alone in the kitchen with the lingering tension of our discussion. "She really believes this could be great for us," David said, after Jessica had left the room. "I'm sure she does. The question is whether what's great for her is necessarily great for us." David frowned, processing this distinction. "You don't think her interests and ours are aligned?" "I think her interests are focused on financial gain and business success. Our interests include those things, but they also include preserving what your father and I built here, maintaining the agricultural heritage of this land, ensuring that future generations have the option to continue ranching if they choose. But if the resort development was successful, it could provide financial security that would give future generations more options, not fewer." I set down my coffee cup and looked at David directly. "Or it could provide financial security for Jessica while eliminating every option except the ones she chooses. Once this ranch is converted to resort development, it can never be a ranch again. The soil will be compacted, the water rights will be altered, the grazing patterns will be destroyed. It's a one-way decision that can't be undone." David was quiet. For a long moment, staring out the kitchen window at the pasture where our cattle were beginning their daily routine of grazing and socializing. The scene was peaceful and purposeful, animals doing what they'd evolved to do in an environment that supported their natural behaviors. "I hadn't thought about it being irreversible," he said finally. "Most business decisions can be changed if they don't work out. You can sell equipment, change marketing strategies, try different approaches. But you can't unconvert a resort development back into a working ranch. The infrastructure changes alone would make it impossible. So if we did this, and it didn't work out financially, we'd be stuck with it." "Exactly. And resort businesses are notoriously vulnerable to economic downturns, changes in tourism patterns, shifts in consumer preferences. The COVID pandemic showed how quickly hospitality businesses can collapse when travel patterns change." David nodded slowly, clearly beginning to understand the risks that Jessica had glossed over in her enthusiastic presentations. "She makes it sound like a sure thing." "No investment is a sure thing, and the bigger the promised returns, the bigger the risks usually are." Through the office door, we could hear Jessica's voice rising with excitement as she discussed timeline, accelerations and partnership structures with her Denver investors. She sounded confident and aggressive, like someone who was accustomed to getting what she wanted through persistence and professional charm. In 2 more days, Patricia's legal work would be complete, and Jessica would discover that all her planning and scheming had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of her position in our family. She'd counted on inheriting control over ranch decisions, but she would inherit nothing at all. The woman who'd snatched food from my hands had also tried to snatch our family's future. But she'd underestimated the quiet determination of a 72-year-old veteran who'd learned the value of strategic planning under pressure. Jessica was about to learn that lesson herself. The envelope from Patricia Hawkins arrived on a Tuesday, morning that smelled like spring rain and fresh possibilities. I recognized her law firm's return address immediately, my heart accelerating as I carried the certified mail receipt to the kitchen table where my coffee was still steaming. David had left an hour earlier to move cattle to the south pasture, and Jessica was in Denver again for what she called final negotiations with her development investors. The timing was perfect for what I suspected this envelope contained. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored letterhead with Patricia's elegant signature at the bottom. Margaret, all documents have been executed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk as of yesterday afternoon. The trust modifications are now legally binding and irrevocable. Jessica Morrison has been completely removed from all inheritance, provisions, and Marcus Brennan has been designated as your secondary beneficiary and co-trustee. I'm prepared to send the notification letter to Ms. Morrison whenever you give the word. Patricia. I read the letter 3 times, each reading making the reality more concrete. After 5 days of careful pretending, of cooking Jessica's favorite meals and listening to her development schemes, of watching her plan a future that would never belong to her, the legal groundwork was finally complete. She no longer had any claim to our ranch, our assets, or our family legacy. The woman who'd taken food from my hands had lost everything she'd counted on inheriting. But the most delicate part still lay ahead. David needed to understand what I'd done and why. Needed to hear it from me before Jessica received her notification, and the inevitable explosion followed. The conversation would be painful. My son would feel caught between loyalty to his mother and love for his fiancée, between respect for my decisions and concern for Jessica's reaction. But it had to happen today, before Jessica returned from Denver with whatever new schemes her investors had convinced her to pursue. I folded Patricia's letter and slipped it into my desk drawer, then walked out to find David. The morning air carried the scent of wet earth and new grass, and our cattle were settling into their moved positions with the contentment that came from fresh grazing opportunities. David was checking fence lines along the eastern boundary, his movements methodical and thorough as he ensured the herd's security in their new location. "How are they adjusting to the move?" I called as I approached. "Really well. The grass is perfect here, and they seem happy to have more space." He straightened from examining a fence post, his face bright with the satisfaction that came from work well done. "I think we'll keep them here through the end of the month, then rotate them back to the western pasture." "That sounds like a good plan. Your father always said rotation was the key to maintaining healthy grassland." We walked along the fence line together, David pointing out areas where posts might need replacement next season and discussing his plans for improving water distribution in this section of the ranch. His knowledge of the land was deep and intuitive, developed through years of careful observation and gradual assumption of responsibility for ranch operations. He understood our property at a level Jessica would never achieve, saw it as a living system rather than a collection of development opportunities. "David, I need to talk to you about something important," I said when we reached the shade of the old cottonwood tree near the creek. "Something about the family trust and Jessica's inheritance." His expression shifted from contentment to concern. "What about it?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I've made some changes to the legal documents. Jessica is no longer designated as a beneficiary or co-trustee." David stared at me for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hurt. "What do you mean she's not a beneficiary anymore?" "I mean, I've had her name removed from all inheritance documents. The will, the trust, everything. She has no legal claim to any part of our family assets." "Mom?" Why would you do that without talking to me first? The pain in his voice cut through me like cold wind, but I forced myself to continue. Because of what happened at Sunday dinner. The way she treated me, the way she spoke to me, the way she physically took food out of my hands and threw it away. That was one incident. She was stressed about work and she apologized for it. David, she snatched a fork out of my mouth while I was eating and told me I was too slow. Then she scraped my dinner into the garbage disposal like it was table. Scraps. That wasn't stress. That was contempt. David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded me so much of his father when Robert was wrestling with difficult decisions. I know it looked bad, but she really is sorry about it. She's been trying to make it up to you ever since. Has she? Or has she been managing the situation to protect her inheritance while moving forward with plans to convert our ranch into a resort development? That's not fair. The development discussions are about creating financial opportunities for all of us. Are they? Or are they about giving Jessica control over decisions that will fundamentally change everything your father and I built here? David was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. I could see him processing what I'd told him, trying to reconcile his love for Jessica with the implications of my actions. He was a good man caught in an impossible situation, and my heart ached for the pain I was causing him. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked finally. "Since the morning after that dinner. I met with Patricia Hawkins the next day and started the process of removing Jessica from all inheritance documents. So for the past week, while Jessica's been talking about our future together, while she's been making plans and having business meetings, you've been secretly eliminating her from those plans entirely. I've been protecting our family legacy from someone who showed me exactly what she thinks of me and my place in her vision of the future." David turned to face me directly, his expression serious and searching. "Do you really believe Jessica doesn't care about you? That she sees you as nothing more than an obstacle to inheritance?" I thought about how to answer this question honestly, without destroying his faith in the woman he loved. "I think Jessica cares about me primarily as it relates to her relationship with you and her access to our family assets. When those considerations weren't present, when she was stressed and focused on her own priorities, she showed me how she really sees me. One moment of rudeness doesn't define someone's entire character." "You're right, but it can reveal character that was hidden under better circumstances." Jessica took food from the hands of a 72-year-old woman and told her she was eating too slowly. What does that tell you about how she'll treat me when I'm 80 and really need patience and care? This question hung in the air between us like smoke from a distant fire. David couldn't answer it because he knew what the answer was, knew that someone who would snatch food from an elderly person's hands wasn't likely to become more patient and respectful as that person aged and became more vulnerable. Maybe she would learn from the experience. Maybe she would change. Maybe. But I'm not willing to bet our family ranch on Jessica's potential for personal growth. And I'm not willing to sign legal documents that would give her control over my care and my assets based on the hope that she'll become a different person. David kicked at a clump of grass, his frustration evident. "So what happens now? Jessica comes home expecting to continue planning our future together, and you tell her she's been cut out of everything? Patricia will send her a formal notification. Let her once I give the word. She'll learn about the changes through official legal channels, which is appropriate since this is a legal matter. This is going to devastate her. She's been counting on the inheritance to support her business plans, to provide security for our future family. If Jessica's business plans depend on inheriting someone else's money, then they're not very good business plans. And if her sense of security comes from counting assets that don't belong to her yet, then she's built her expectations on a foundation that was never solid." David was quiet again, processing the logic of what I'd said, even as he struggled with its emotional implications. He loved Jessica, believed in their relationship, wanted to build a life with her that included the ranch and its legacy. My actions had suddenly made that future much more complicated and uncertain. What about the development opportunities? The investors she's been working with? What about them? If resort development is such a good investment opportunity, Jessica, and her investors can pursue it on property they actually own or control, our ranch is not available for that purpose. But the financial projections, the potential returns. David, do you want to convert this ranch into a resort development? He looked out at our cattle again, at the mountains rising beyond our pastures, at the creek winding through grassland that had supported our family for 3 generations. No. I want it to stay a ranch. I want to keep doing what we've always done here. Then Jessica's development plans were never going to work for our family anyway. They were going to work for her and her investors, but not for us. I hadn't thought about it that way. Jessica is very good at presenting her interests as if they're family interests. But taking food from my hands wasn't about family harmony, and converting our ranch to resort development isn't about our financial security. Both are about what Jessica wants, regardless of how it affects the rest of us. David sat down on a fallen log, his shoulders slumped with the weight of everything I'd told him. I don't know how to handle this with her. She's going to be furious, and she's going to blame me for not preventing it somehow. You couldn't have prevented it because you didn't know it was happening, and her anger is not your responsibility to manage. But she's going to be my wife. Her feelings are my responsibility. Her feelings are her responsibility. Your responsibility is to build a marriage based on honesty and mutual respect, not on managing your partner's emotions when she doesn't get everything she wants. This was perhaps the hardest truth David needed to understand, that Jessica's reaction to learning about the inheritance changes would reveal something important about her character and her priorities. If she responded with understanding for my position, acceptance of my right to make decisions about my own assets, and focus on building a relationship with our family based on something other than financial expectations, then perhaps she was worthy of his love and commitment. But if she responded with rage, accusations, attempts to manipulate him into pressuring me to reverse the changes, or threats to end their engagement unless her inheritance was restored, then she would be showing him exactly who she was and what she valued most about their relationship. When will you have Patricia send the notification letter? Soon. Jessica needs to know about the changes before she makes any more commitments or agreements based on expectations that no longer match reality. Can I be the one to tell her, instead of having her find out through a legal letter? I considered this request carefully. David wanted to control how Jessica received the news, wanted to soften the blow and minimize her anger. But his desire to protect her from the full impact of her actions might also protect her from understanding their consequences. You can tell her if you want to, but Patricia still needs to send the official notification for legal purposes. And David, when you have that conversation, I need you to be completely honest about what happened and why I made these changes. What do you mean? I mean, don't minimize what she did at dinner. Don't make excuses for her behavior or suggest that my reaction was disproportionate. She took food from my hands and told me I was eating too slowly. That's exactly what happened, and that's exactly why I removed her from the inheritance. David nodded reluctantly. I'll be honest with her. And I need you to understand that these changes are permanent. I'm not going to reverse them based on apologies or promises or threats. Jessica had her chance to treat me with respect, and she chose differently. Even if she's genuinely sorry? Even if she commits to changing her behavior? David, I'm 72 years old. I don't have time to wait for people to become who they should have been all along. And I'm not going to sign legal documents giving someone power over my life and assets based on their promises to be better in the future. We sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the sound of cattle moving through grass and water flowing over stones in the creek. The morning had grown warm, and I could smell the distinctive scent of sage from the hills beyond our pastures. This land would continue its ancient rhythms long after the current human drama had passed. continuing to support life in its many forms, regardless of who held legal title to it. I should call Jessica and ask her to come home so we can have this conversation in person, David said finally. That's probably wise. She'll want to return anyway once she realizes that her development plans can't move forward. What do you mean? I mean that without inheritance rights to this property, Jessica has no standing to negotiate with developers or investors about its future use. She can't commit to property assessments or partnership agreements for land she doesn't own or control. David's eyes widened as he realized the full implications of what I'd done. Her entire business strategy with the Denver investors was based on her expectation of inheriting this ranch. Exactly. And now that expectation has been eliminated, her investors will need to look elsewhere for development opportunities. She's going to lose those business relationships. All the work she's put into building connections with them will be wasted. That's the consequence of building business relationships on assets you don't actually own. Jessica counted chickens before they hatched, and now she'll discover that some of those eggs were never going to hatch at all. David stood up slowly, his movement heavy with the weight of everything he now understood. I need to think about how to handle this. Take all the time you need, but remember that Jessica's reaction to this news will tell you everything you need to know about her priorities and her character. Pay attention to whether she's more upset about losing money or about losing the trust and respect of your family. And if she's more upset about the money, then you'll know what she valued most about her relationship with us. David walked back, toward the house, his steps slower than usual, his shoulders carrying the burden of information that would change everything about his engagement and his future plans. I remained by the creek for a while longer, watching our cattle and thinking about the conversation that was coming. Jessica would be furious when she learned about the inheritance changes. She would likely blame David for not warning her, blame me for making decisions without consulting her, blame everyone except herself for the situation she now faced. She might threaten to end the engagement, might accuse our family of financial manipulation, might claim that she'd been led to believe her inheritance was guaranteed. But the truth was simpler than whatever story she constructed to explain her disappointment. She had treated me with contempt, and I had responded by protecting our family assets from her influence. She had counted on inheriting wealth she'd never earned from people she'd never respected, and now she would learn that inheritance was a privilege, not an entitlement. The woman who'd snatched food from my hands had just discovered that she'd also snatched away her own future security. Sometimes the consequences of our actions take time to become clear, but they always come due eventually. Jessica Morrison was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. The phone call came at 3 p.m. Jessica's voice was ice-cold fury wrapped in legal threats. "You senile old woman, you have no idea what you've just done to me," David had told her. She'd driven straight from Denver to Patricia's office, demanding to see the trust documents, screaming about elder abuse and mental incompetence until security escorted her out. Now she was making one last attempt to salvage her inheritance, through intimidation. "I understand exactly what I've done," I replied calmly. "I've protected my family's legacy from someone who showed me her true character. This isn't over. I'll contest every document, claim you're mentally unfit, drag this through court until there's nothing left. You're welcome to try." Patricia anticipated that reaction and documented everything thoroughly, including your threat just now, which I'm recording. The line went dead. David found me an hour later, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint, our mountains gold and purple. His face was hollow, aged by the day's revelations. "She ended the engagement," he said quietly, settling into Robert's old rocking chair. "Packed her things and left. Said she couldn't marry into a family that would treat her like an outsider after everything she'd invested in our relationship." "I'm sorry, son." "No, you're not. And honestly, neither am I. You were right about her priorities. When I told her about the trust changes, The first thing she asked wasn't how it would affect our relationship or our family. It was how much money she was losing. We rocked in comfortable silence as darkness settled over our ranch. Our cattle were bedding down for the night, Bessie's new calf staying close to her mother's side. Life continuing its ancient patterns, untroubled by human drama. The Denver investors dropped her this afternoon, David added. Once they learned she had no actual rights to the property, they moved on to other opportunities. Her whole business strategy collapsed in a single day. Actions have consequences. She gambled that she could treat me poorly without any cost. To herself. She lost everything. She lost things that were never really hers to begin with. 6 months later, David married Sarah Mitchell, a veterinarian who understood that ranch life meant early mornings, hard work, and respect for both animals and elders. She never asked about inheritance or development opportunities. She asked about vaccination schedules and breeding programs and whether I needed help with canning season. At their wedding reception in our barn, I stood to make a toast. Family isn't about blood or legal documents, I said, looking at faces lit by string lights and genuine affection. It's about who shows up with love instead of expectations, who offers patience instead of demands, who sees your worth as a person, rather than your value as an asset. Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for protecting what matters. The ranch thrives under their care. Our cattle multiply, our land heals, our legacy continues. And every Sunday dinner, we take our time eating, savoring both the food and each other's company. Some lessons cost everything to learn. Jessica learned hers too late. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment about your own experiences with family boundaries and financial expectations. Have you ever had to make tough decisions to protect what you'd built? Hit that subscribe button for more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. Sometimes the quiet victories are the most powerful ones.